Cesaria. This is talk show number 40. Today is July 16th, 2006. This is DJ Spiderbite, and we're here with the weekly talk show. I've got several topics to discuss today, and I've got some great guests with me today. What I think I'll do is I'll start our show off by immediately introducing our guests, and I guess I could call them special guests, I suppose. They all represent different sites amongst the UO community. We'll start off with our frequent guest, Viceroy of MMOGradio.com. Go ahead and introduce your Vice, say hi to everybody, and tell us a little bit about yourself for those who are just tuning in for the first time.
Sure thing. Hello, everybody. I am, of course, Viceroy, and I am from MMOGradio.com, and I play on the Chesapeake chart. And it's always good to be here to talk about the game of Ultima Online. So glad to be here.
Thanks. And we're welcoming back a previous guest from one of our interview shows, Ellerin of UO-Auction2.com. Ellerin, go ahead and tell us a little bit about yourself and say hi to everybody out there.
Hello, I'm Ellerin. I'm a UO2 auction. I'm a UO Auction 2 administrator, and I'm just part of the happy staff over there.
Great. And today we have somebody new joining us. For those who are avid readers of I Awoken Britannia blog, we have the blog's owner, Ghosty, with us today. Go ahead, Ghosty. Tell us a little bit about yourself and say hi to everybody.
Hi, Cesaria. This is Ghosty, and thanks to UORadio for inviting me on today. I have the I Awoken Britannia blog at britannia.blogspot.com and two or three other UO sites. I never sleep, and I'm happy to be here. Thanks.
We're glad to have you. I myself have been a fan of the blog site for quite some time now. I guess what we're going to start out today with is, well, the biggest thing on people's minds right now, or at least those who are interested in this sort of stuff. I know that there are those out there that are a bit sour about all the development time that goes into these things when there are stuff that can be fixed. I'm a little torn because I do like aspects of this stuff that's going on. What I'm referring to are the current event scenarios going on the charts, and that seem to be escalating. Now we're getting back into sort of what we had with the Britain invasion, except it's taking place in Vesper, Papau, and I guess Skara is getting hit as well, or going to be. I've been reading a lot about what's going on. I went and checked these places out. So what I'd like to do, I know Ghosty's just now coming back to the game, but I guess he's been doing a lot of research on what's going on and this sort of thing, so I don't know if you followed what's led up to this, but it started out with sort of what I like to call the Scooby Club.
Yeah, that's pretty accurate. It starts the way a lot of past scenarios have started. There's it'll either be one or the other. Either something will appear in Britannia Network News, and then the content will begin to appear as players go to investigate, or the content will appear first, and then the other stuff will show up on Britannia News Network and Stratix and everything else as players get involved. It's one or the other. As far as this scenario with the snake people we all know and love, I haven't a clue. All we know is they have attacked Vesper, they have attacked Papau, and where it's going to go from there, we don't know yet as far as I've been able to gather.
Very interesting. I just have to kind of chime in here because looks like Spiderbite just kind of like lost his internet connection and everything. So I am going to kind of pick up the ball for him, and there he is. So he's back.
Sorry about that. For those tuning in yesterday, we had a massive storm come through here, and it knocked out a lot of internet services. So once in a while it might disappear, but I got Viceroy here to pick up the ball. He did, like you said, he does know how to fill my shoes and vice versa. Not sure where I left off, but I guess basically what I was talking about was basically the new or the new event scenarios, and and everybody's opinions on what's going to happen. Let's just start out with opinions on these in general. For everybody here, I know me and Ghosty at least, and then Vice, I suppose. I don't know if you ever participated in them, but I know for a fact me and Ghosty go back as far as the very first SEER events and how they were run versus these canned events that are taking place now, with expected outcomes and that sort of thing. So I'm going to go ahead and start with Vice because I think he has a similar opinion as I do as well, and I'll let him touch on it. Go ahead, Vice.
Sure thing. The only problem I have with, the whole can events is that it's already predetermined before you even, whether you participate in the event or you or you don't, it's not going to make any difference, So, I mean, you could just have everybody boycott, these scenarios and these events and not have anything to do with them. And I guarantee you these events would still carry on and fulfill themselves. And the whole scenario would unravel itself, so to speak, and reveal what it's all about, regardless if anybody was actually participating in it. I can almost guarantee you that because it's already, basically built for that very purpose, to lead on to something else. It's basically a storyline. It's not an event that you have any control over. You really don't determine the outcome. It's not unique because it's on all the various different shards, and stuff like that. So rather than each shard having its own history and its own events and being unique in a lot of ways, you see, like the Vidian invasion being like this whole storyline for the entire game of Ultima Online rather than individual shards or anything of that nature. Last but not least, another thing, I do participate in some of these events and everything. If they do seem interesting and appealing, but if I got to go look for something, well then I'm not going to participate in the event. If I know where it's at, for example, it says the Vidian invasion. It pretty much says where the invasion is taking place, Papua or whatever the hell you call it, and Skarbray, I think Spider-Bat said one was, and then you have Vesper. Which is the one I went to, and I went there and actually did some investigation to see what's going on with this and everything, just see how bad he is. And believe it or not, I was actually kind of surprised just how minimal the spawn was. It wasn't really, oh my God, there's an invasion, retreat, or anything of that nature. It was like, oh, there's a Vidian, and he's looking really hungry, and he's looking at me, So, I mean, it wasn't like I was running out the door screaming for my dear life or anything like that. It was, more of a person, anybody with the right proper equipment or a Slayer weapon could easily take on 3 of these things with no sweat. They was like, wow, this is real easy and everything. So, really, I mean, if they really want to make it interesting, and I guarantee you, the reason they didn't just make it a massive invasion to where it was just like, where you running for your dear life is because, just with the Britannian, the invasion of Britain, about 6 months ago to a year, a lot of people were complaining that the spawn was just too much and everything. So I would imagine that would have some kind of impact on the spawn levels in which for the Vidian invasion. And so, my whole point is that I've seen 3 people take on, I've seen a person take on 3 of these Vidians with no sweat. And, and these things ain't spawning fast enough. So, I mean, really, is it really all that exciting? Probably not. At least it wasn't for me. I was like, wow. Yeah, I got killed a few times, and that's because, I didn't learn to, get away fast enough or kind of distance myself because I'm a warrior. And you got to get right up next to him whenever you're a warrior. But that's my thoughts and opinions on that.
Yeah, the only thing I would touch on that is, as far as an outcome goes, yeah, they do have an outcome of some sort that sways one way or another depending on participation. We saw that with the Brit event. your statue says something different on it at the end. There's not like the old days where the Sears where if you didn't just, like the U swamp, for example, you didn't clean that swamp up, it stuck like that for years. And with all the same monsters spawning, that sort of thing. It was, you screwed up, you're stuck with what you got now. Non-functioning NPCs, plague beasts, etc. I know on Sonoma we messed up and it stayed there for years afterwards. Ghosty, you were next. Go ahead. Give us your opinions on what's going on right now compared to what like I said, you and I were around for the SEER events, and those were some of my favorite events. Go ahead.
Sorry, is that me?
Yeah, go ahead. Go.
Yeah, sorry about that. Yeah, I've seen a pattern over the years as far as events in UO, and they follow the gamut from the EM events from long ago, 99, 2000, up to the event that was in U with the infection. Then progressing to the invasion in Britain, and then the canned events that we're seeing today. I think the UO team has been trying to find a happy medium, and I think they've been kind of at a loss to do it. The early events, the EM events, yeah, if nobody participated, the event went nowhere. They absolutely required player participation for anything to happen. But the end results of those events were not... they weren't earth-shattering. They weren't anything that really changed the face of the realm. Then we had the big events. We had, of course, the creation of Trammel and all of the events leading up to that point. There was tons and tons and tons of player participation at that point. And it was probably the last of the really big player events that we'll probably ever see in UO, because the player base is very different than it is now. Players were much more involved in the storyline, much more involved in the fiction. This was involving things that was changing the very nature of their game. So you saw huge amounts of participation in Trinsic and in other towns for the creation of Trammel. Then after that, you had the infection scenario in U, where players had to accomplish a set number of goals, or U was going to become a swamp. And some shards participated and were able to save the town, and other shards didn't participate, or they did participate but they weren't able to finish the quest, and U became a swamp. And that was something that changed from shard to shard. And those two sets of events, I think, worked the best. But now we're seeing, like, for example, with the invasion of the Lizardmen into Britain, that just got to be a pain in the neck, because nobody really cared whether or not Britain got overrun or not. It wasn't a big deal. And I think it was because the EMs didn't take into account that, hey, players have 3 or 4 different facets they can go do their business on. All the bank sitters simply moved their stuff over to Malice. Players who rarely went to Britain anyway, because it was always crowded or whatever, didn't care and didn't go to Britain for that event. It just stretched on for days and days and days, and nobody cared, and eventually they just brought it to an end because the participation just wasn't what they thought it was going to be. It went on too long. And now we have the canned events where, I agree with Viceroy. Yeah, whether or not anybody goes and participates or not, the thing's going to unwind and open up just the way it would have anyway. I think that we need to take an example from those two events, the infection scenario from U and the things that went on for the creation of Trammel, where they need to find scenarios that the players are going to care about, that do affect their world, and that it gives them a true chance to work together or work as individuals to change the face of the game. Those are the kinds of things that people are going to respond to. They want epic quests. They don't want, they could care less about, a couple of Ophidians wandering into Vesper, because everybody's so overloaded with high-power magic items. Experienced characters are so powerful that a few Ophidians don't really make a hill of beans. You're going to invade. Make it dangerous, make it worth something, make it something that the players are going to be able to say, hey, yeah, if we want to be able to use Vesper again, we need to do something about it, and give the players a reason to give a flying fiddle about Vesper in the first place.
That's exactly right. And me and Vice and a couple other people were discussing the same thing yesterday, as a matter of fact. Regarding it's way too easy. They did not calibrate it to the item-based game that it is today, even since the last events. You're right. That's a great example. You got about 5 or 6 Ophidians running around Vesper, around the bank. And if these Ophidians were smart, they would have researched their enemy and saw, wow, these guys are wearing nuclear suits of armor, so to speak, and carrying these weapons that could slice us in half in a heartbeat. Hey, let's send 6 of our guys over there, and we'll just take them all out. Yeah, not a bright idea. Ellerin, you were next. Go ahead.
Well, when I look at this scenario, I think back to when the Orcs invaded, and it's like, yawn, why bother? The only thing is I just hope that it won't run like 2 weeks as long as the other one did.
Oh, that Brit invasion was just mind-numbingly long. It was almost like the whole point wasn't to have an event. It was just to punish the West Britain bank vendors. I think that in my opinion, and this is speculating, they felt that Malice wasn't being used enough. It was more trailer park than anything else. So they decided, let's clean out West Britain Bank.
There's also the it's a complex community, and you also have a lot of crafters, too. And when they have these massive invasions, unless they go to Luna or some of these out-of-the-way facets, they're not going to be able to really participate in the things they like to do and buy the things they need to do to supply the players in the game. So, it is a complex problem.
Make good point. The crafters. Well, I remember the EM event before last over on Sonoma. REM made a genuine effort to get the crafters involved, because in order to block off the Orc invasion, she had the crafters had to craft stuff to build the blockades up at the passages and stuff like that. So even all the crafters took place. Everybody had a part in it. Viceroy, you were next. Go ahead.
Actually, yeah, I'm kind of wondering if they're going to erect these statues and everything, letting us know how many Ophidians we ended up slaying during the period of this scenario, like they did with the Britain invasion. Them little lizardmen statues that they set up at the near the West Bank and everything. Wasn't that, like kind of laughable or whatever? I mean, I don't know what everybody else here thought about those statues, but it wasn't like, oh, wow, it's just like, every time I look at this, lizardman statue and walk by it, it's like, God, am I going to have to look at this thing being here for 4 years later and then wonder what the hell was this thing about, 4 years later? Or better yet, let me rephrase that comment. Let's just say, for example, we get a new player that comes in 4 years later. God forbid the game isn't dead by then. Let's say a new player comes in, and he walks by this statue. Now what does that statue really tell him? I mean, does it tell him when this event occurred? No. What does the statue pretty much inform anybody that walks by it? Oh, how many monsters were slain during this one event in history? Whoa. And going back to the Britain invasion and everything, it was just like an event that they started up and just forgot about totally. But then again, at the same time, if I'm not mistaken, wasn't that around the same time when all the developers were leaving Electronic Arts around that time as well? I could have swore that probably had something to do with it, or the timing, around that was something like that. Also, so I'm kind of wondering if they're going to erect these statues or not. Just wondering,
Well, that's exactly what I was getting. I think Ghost made a good point that back in the good scenario days, there was always some huge world-shattering outcome at the end of an event, and just the past few have just been so disappointing. A statue gets erected. Woohoo. It's like, great. The world of Caesarea has changed forever. Beware of the lizard man statue. Ghosty, go ahead.
Oh, thanks. I mean, it's not that I see anything wrong with a statue. It's not so much what gets left behind. It's what, how can I put this? It's not so much the fact that there's a statue there now as opposed to not having one. It's what went on for that particular item to come into existence. For example, when I first started playing, I used to, I found that I could train my newbie characters over on the island of Aklo, because very few people outside of the town on Aklo, very few people did any adventuring at all on that island because there was really nothing there. It was just like one or two houses in the south, and that was it, you know. And if you go out of the town of Aklo and you go south, maybe a little bit southeast, you will find what, if you click on it, it's called the Big Sticky Rock. And it's this big rock with a fence around it. And that's all it is. You double-click on it, you try to hide context menu it or whatever. It's just a big, sticky rock. And for the longest time, I wondered, what in the world is this big, sticky rock? What is it? Where did it come from? And to this day, I have yet to find out what the big sticky rock is, and I doubt there's anybody walking around today who remembers or knows what this thing was for. It was probably from some very early EM event that happened. But it's a piece of UO history that got lost, as far as I've been able to tell. There's nothing on UO website about it. There's nothing on any other sites about it. I've never found anything having to do with the big sticky rock. No clue. So, you know, if 4 years down the road somebody looks at this statue in Britain and goes, oh, well, what the heck was this statue about? Oh, I see, it was an invasion, we killed such and so on and so forth. You know, all right, well, whoopee-doo. If they had just the statue for this invasion, maybe just an engraving for that, you know, this was to commemorate those who died in the invasion, or maybe not even that. Players might be inclined to keep the UO history a little bit more, you know, because new players to the game are going to see this statue and they're going to ask somebody, what's the statue about? And in the asking, that's going to keep the story going. I remember players coming to UO for the first time not too long after the whole infection in U thing, asking me why the shard they came from, U was fine, and they come here and it's a swamp. They didn't know anything about the story. So bringing player into action into the keeping of UO lore is a big part of what makes the events work. But again, we have the original problem. We need to have events that the players actually care about, or nobody's going to even bother with going through the process of remembering or keeping track of all of these events. Because the canned ones that are going on now, they're going to unfold, they're going to open up and end just the way they would have anyway, whether anybody participates in these things or not. You know, which is simply the wrong way to do any of these events anyway. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, the reward's just not worth the effort, and I think people are seeing that these days with these canned events. I go over out of curiosity, to be honest. I went over there the other night, simply out of curiosity, to see what it was all about, what was going on, what people were doing. On my shard, it's a lot different. It's much more difficult on Siege Perilous, only because players don't deck themselves out because there is no insurance. So people are fighting in GM armor. They're playing with one weapon, which is always a Snake Slayer for this. So it's a lot tougher. We're having a rougher time handling it. But on the production shards, you know, when there's nothing to lose and you've got, you know, the $8 million man suit on, you know, you're gonna. It's nothing. They're going through them like soft butter with a knife. Viceroy, you were next. Go ahead.
Yeah, you know, here's something I would like to, you know, suggest, when it comes to, statues and something like this sticky rock that nobody knows anything about. Now, players, they can look at something like this and see the values on a statue and everything, and they can ask, well, what was this Britain invasion about? And my question is, to that, is, when a player comes up to another player who's been around for a while and asks them about it, and they know what it was about, are they going to tell a favorable story, or are they going to tell a bad story, like, well, that's when EA just kind of started this event up and forgot about it and left it at that, and it was several months of nothing but, pure hell around here and everything like that. So my question is how are people going to tell the story, or better yet, why not just put a gump that whenever you click on these statues and everything, it actually brings up like a gump or a little window to your screen, and it actually gives you the history about the statue. That way, that every shard has this, gump and everything, and people can double click on these things like the sticky rock, the Britain invasion lizardman statue or whatever, and they can click on these objects and actually know what's its symbolic meaning to the shard in which you're on and everything. What meaning does it have? What purpose does it serve and everything? So, that's what I think ought to happen with these objects. But right now, I mean, the way the lizardman statue is, you put your little cursor over it, or your little finger over it, in the game, and it brings up the values. And it's like, wow, like, it's just basically bragging rights. I mean, there's just no interest in something like that. I mean, that doesn't interest me. I mean, I don't know. Oh, and another thing I wanted to add to that was, with something like the Ophidian invasion, why not set a limit to the number of Ophidians that there are? Like, for example, there's like 300 or 400 Ophidians that actually invade the city. Once those 300 or 400 are slain, there's no more. Why not actually see these Ophidians actually moving from one side of town to the other side of town, slowly occupying and taking over the town? I mean, because they come in such sheer force that, at first it's almost impossible to fight them off. But then, as they move and spread out across the city, you can pick them off one by one over time. So you can then maybe liberate the city or something like that. I mean, why not something like that? I mean, I think that would be a lot better than just defining a spawn around the Vesper Bank, which is basically really the only place in Vesper that you really find them spawning at.
Yeah, and you bring up a good point that I was just thinking about while you said that. I'm sure everybody else here remembers. I'm pretty sure this was on All Stars. I know it was on Sonoma for sure, and Pacific. But the EMs launched an invasion on Trinsic one year. And what happened with that is the monsters would spawn somewhere off screen, like on the side of Trinsic, and move through either gate. And literally invade the city as they went through it. And then once they reached the end of the city, they'd start moving around. And it took a long time and a lot of people. I remember publishing a short story about that whole invasion, as a matter of fact. And on Stratix as a news reporter, because it was so massive and it took strategy and effort, and it was just so much more enjoyable. People had a blast. I think there was only one shard that failed at it, and it took weeks to finish, or to actually finally get enough effort going to do it. But people got into it, and that's what we're not seeing here. Basically, all we're seeing is a spawn. This may as well be a new dungeon. So, Ellerin, go ahead. You're next.
I was thinking back on the Titan invasion, where we all had the chance to get the different types of weapons. And basically, the game kind of got flooded with the special types of weapons so that they weren't really that special anymore. And perhaps maybe they might put some special things in for people to loot off the monsters that would make it a little bit more enticing. I don't know. I
kind of like that idea, but at the same time, then we've got the gimme crowd, and like they did with the like you said, the Titan weapons and stuff like that. Even then, I saw the interest trickle away because it flooded the game with these weapons. And then, if you recall, these weapons got nerfed anyways a month or two later because they found out they were too powerful. But go ahead, Elred.
They just need to maybe shorten the spawns a little bit instead of running them on for 6 weeks. After like 4 weeks, I think that's when the interest starts to drop off.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. The people have to their interest levels don't last that long in this game, especially if it's repetitive. If there is no cause behind it. We've got, something angered the Ophidians. Go find out what it is. Well, I'm sure that's going to be our EM's job to lead us on these quests as the Britannia Royal Guard or whatever. But in the meantime, it's just a new spawn. Did you have more to say on that, Elrin?
No, I think that's about all on that.
Okay, Steve, go ahead. You were next.
Thank you. I think bringing in some kind of new item as an enticement for getting involved in any of these quests is absolutely the wrong idea. And I'm probably the worst kind of critic on this point because off the top of my head, I don't have a good idea as for a replacement. But we've got so many items in this game now. We have so much stuff. Nobody is going to care about getting involved for more stuff unless it's stuff that's going to be and stay better than the stuff that we've got now. Stuff that we've got now is awesome of it. On the other side of the coin, getting players involved because, quote unquote, it's changing the face of Britannia or it's changing the face of Caesarea or our game or whatever. You're talking about scenarios that have to have a really grand, epic, huge effect on the game. You were talking about things on the scale of where, Minax reappears and starts ripping up Feluca. To the point where the PvP crowd doesn't get to have their fun, and now they need to get involved and fight this back if they ever want to have the U gate to play in again. That kind of stuff, offering items as enticement is slowly showing to be something that just does not work. The invasion of Britain was a beautiful example of this. Yeah, if you killed enough generals, you could get these specially labeled weapons, And I have one or two, but I don't use them, they're just keepsakes, And that's all they are. They're really is just another piece of geedunk. And, I'll be the first to admit it, I'm a sucker for pixel crack, but at the other extreme, I didn't go and fight in this invasion every single day, certainly not to save Britain, and I certainly wasn't all that excited about, getting an axe that said vanquishing on it or something like that. Even if they had offered items that were genuinely useful, somebody's going to go find a way to farm this stuff. I have no problem making gold in this game, and if I have a problem making gold in this game, I can go buy some gold in this game, and I can buy one of these items off of somebody else who wants to take the time and trouble to get them. So, items as an enticement for completing these quests is simply a bad idea. It's just not going to work anymore, because we've got so much stuff already. On the other side of the coin, simply holding the quests to hold the quests isn't going to work, because who cares? The UO player base is not what it was 3 or 4 years ago. It's certainly not what it was after Age of Shadows. A few months after that, the numbers started to dwindle. Now we have a game that has a very loyal but niche following. We don't have 400,000 subscribers anymore, but we have all this land on every shard. We have Trammel, we have Feluca, we have Malice, we have Takuno. we probably have more land coming down the pike later on. You stretch all of these players across all of this land, and who cares if Britain gets taken over? You know? Who really cares? Does it really change anybody's play style? Does it really affect anybody's game? Does it prevent anybody from doing what they're going to do? No. Let the Ophidians have Vester. I mean, let the Ophidians have Papau. Who really cares? It doesn't affect anybody. The EMs need to come up with stuff that is going to affect everybody. And they need to come up with stuff that is going to engage the players to actually go out and do something about it. The infection in you was a good scenario because it did, at that time, have an effect on the game world. And a lot of players did care about it. Today, I don't think you could pull that off in you. I just don't think it would work. The whole, everything that happened before the introduction of Trammel, the invasion of Trinsic and everything else like that, that was a huge, epic, world-changing series of events. So yes, everybody was involved. Today, I don't think you'd see it. The EMs really need to sit down, do some research, and find something that's going to work on that massive a scale. Because the little stuff that's just going to unfold anyway isn't going to draw the players in, and Lord knows, and more Geedunk and more Pixel Crack isn't going to do it either.
Exactly. Yeah, offering items. I can just tell you firsthand, just from the simple EM events, where, you know, I don't know how it worked on the other shards, but my EM would start out, or our EM, I shouldn't call her my EM, I already get enough flack for that as it is. But our EM over on Sonoma used to toss out sashes at the end of the event, at end of the event. So, of course, you had the bank sitters who did nothing the whole event, but then they'd be piling in there completely lagging everybody down with the gimme, 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 gimme kind of stuff. Luckily, she had a system where she could tell who did the most damage to monsters and blah, blah, blah. And I think in one case she even added the word general to one of them who did the most damage to all the monsters and that sort of thing. But at the same time, I've seen those sashes go for millions and millions of gold. So you're still a reward at it, and with zero effort, and it was by somebody who didn't even participate in the event, yet they get rewarded for it. So yeah, you're wrong. Or you're not wrong, I'm sorry, they're wrong when I'm referring to the way they're handling this. Viceroy, go ahead.
Yeah, I can tell you why they're not going to do anything that will actually make people want to get involved and actually participate in these events. Because today, most of your players nowadays, they're like, well, that's non-consensual event. I don't want something shoved on me. No, I won't have it, you know, and I don't, by God, I just won't have it, you know, and, you know, that's the way players are nowadays. They, you know, you can't force anything on them because, you know, EA's not in that mindset. EA's like, well, let's hold their hands and let's be nice to them and let's, you know, do all these wonderful things for our players so we don't upset them or make them lose their Lord title because some Ophidian wandered by and killed them. Or something like that, or some, you know, unsuspecting player so happened to recall in not knowing about Davidian because he didn't take the time to read our website. So yeah, let's try to make this non-consent, and you know, let's not try to make this. Let's try to make this consensual. So let's put it over here in a town where nobody's gonna, you know, really give a crap. You know, now let's say for a moment that, you know, these Ophidians, you know, let's just say, I mean, they can come in waves. They don't have to be a spawn. I mean, you can see them coming all the way down the road from Papua or the Second Age coming over towards Vesper or something like that. But, you know, really, if you know, I mean, let's do something that makes it a lot more interesting, that gets players involved, that has some kind of consequences if you don't get involved. Whether, I mean, not a direct consequence, but an indirect one. Let's say, for example, the economy suffers. There's less available resources available, because there's some kind of unique resources that come out of Vesper, and those are no longer available because, look, Vesper's under invasion, is occupied by Ophidians, and that resource is no longer available. For example, if you used to purchase your, let's just say, for example, it was Midnock that was invaded instead of Vesper or Papua or whatever. Let's just use that for an example. Midnock has been taken over by the Ophidians, and now, as a result, the output of ingots being put out towards NPCs are no longer available. So you can no longer purchase your ingots from the NPCs anymore because Midnock is under occupation at the moment. So you ain't gonna see anything coming out there. Something along those lines, it doesn't have to be a direct consequence. It can be indirect. And, I wish people would put a lot more thought in, and my guess is anything. It's either EA is not putting a great deal of thought into it, or the EMs, whoever's controlling this whole event. Either they don't have the resources, or they're not capable of doing it because, the code is so old, or they just are not putting a lot of thought into it. So it has to be something like that. It's either the code, resources, or not putting a lot of thought into it. So, I mean, those are some possible scenarios that you can think about. And also, I'd like to add to your go-to list of available lands so that you can go to is the Second Age as well. So, I mean, even though, like several facets show up, there's actually more than just those facets.
Yep. You're definitely hit the nail on the head with a few of those points. I hate the way the more I talk about it, the less excited I get about them because I guess I'm still so spoiled from the, I like the fact that when I was for the U-Swamp, for example, fighting during that event, when the Seers were doing them, and I was running off in a direction away from it, and I think it was either a GM or a Seer. I didn't know if the Seers had the ability to do that, and it was a hind was standing there as I ran past, and the words came from it: "Stop! Where are you going? Aren't you going to help save the swamp or help save you?" And I was shocked. And it wound up later I realized that that little hind was actually either a Seer or a GM, making sure people were going in the right direction, not getting lost from it. The interaction with the people running the event, the people knowing that somebody's sitting there watching to make sure it's working okay. If that were the case right now, I guarantee if there were Seers in Vesper, these people wouldn't be beating these Ophidians, the way they are. I guarantee that they would be spawning harder ones, whatever it took to make it more tough. Right now, it's written in the code. That's what you get, unless they do another publish to fix it. So, Ghosty, go ahead.
Thanks. Yeah, what you just said reminded me of something else that happened in the dim and distant past of UO that hasn't happened in UO in a very long time. I remember back in '99, and some other players probably even further back as far as the beta, having wrestling matches with Lord Blackthorn. and Lord British coming out every once in a while, and having the occasional joust with foolish players who would be silly enough to try and take this guy on. The part of what's gone wrong as far as events is the lack of EM participation and the lack of GM participation in the playing of roles and characters that would recur and return and be seen on a daily or weekly basis in and amongst the people. Towards the end, Lord British was nothing more than, this still life character that sat in his castle at a desk reading a book and doing nothing else. That's all you saw of him. And then after that, you didn't see anything of him. He went off into the void, and that was the end of that. I know personally one other player that ever got to speak with Lord British. I got to speak with Lord British one day. It was the thrill of a lifetime. I never got to wrestle Lord Blackthorn, unfortunately, because he would have kicked my butt anyway. But that's not the point. The point is that we don't have that sort of epic character in Ultima Online anymore. We haven't had that sort of epic character in a very, very long time. Even with like Lord Blackthorn's Revenge, with like Dawn and all that, it just wasn't the same. It just didn't, that was like the end of an era. Lord Blackthorn died, Lord British went bye-bye, and we haven't had a king, we haven't had a great hero, we haven't had, any real avatar that would stride the world and do whatever it is they do. So in that, we lost a lot of storytelling. The whole thing, like, for example, with all the events that went on with the creation of Trammel, the big impetus behind it all wasn't the creation of Trammel. The big impetus of it all was the conflict between Minax and Lord British. That was the impetus behind all the events, not that there was going to be, a new facet. The new facet and all that is great and fine and wonderful, and everybody was excited about it and happy to get away from the PKs. But as far as getting involved in the events, it wasn't about the creation of a new facet. It was about the conflict between these two very quite invincible personalities. One of which had been walking about and getting involved with the people. I think if EA was to take the time and trouble to hire some real writers, some real storytellers, and to get people to portray these characters or characters like this again, that would go a long way towards bringing people back into the storytelling and back into the fiction of UO, instead of having it continually degrade into not much more than a chat room where you can kill stuff, because that's quickly the way UO is. That's quickly the path that UO is going. It's been going that way, and it's going to continue to. You need to have a basis for the storyline. You have to have a reason for people to care about what happens in this virtual world. And having a hero figure or having a villain figure that players can actually react with and actually speak to and actually perform activities around goes a long way towards accomplishing that goal.
Yeah, you're right, and I think the word that you've mentioned several times that I'm just now starting to pick up here is epic. That's the key word, I think, for these events. We're not getting the epic emphasis on them, whether it's during the battles, after the battles. People like to see a hero. They like to see a celebrity. They like to see a bad guy, and we don't get those. The only bad guys we see in today's events are the ones that the EMs cook up. And typically those are EMs brought from other shards to fill in as the bad guy or whatever. And that bad guy shows up, gives a speech at the end of the event, and he goes bye-bye for another week. We don't see him again. Well, once in a while they make an appearance. I take that back. At least on Sonoma they made appearances. But not very often. And they weren't very violent bad guys. We want a bad guy. We want the evil, we want the good, and we want the epic ending, whether it's disastrous or bad. You'd mentioned talking to Lord British, and I'd never spoken to Lord British myself. I got to see him that time when he spoke one time, but never. The closest I've come is I did get to talk to Dawn. It was during one of the attacks, the Seer attacks, or the Seer round attacks, and I just happened to run up Seer up on the hill and stood there, and because everybody else was doing something, we just started chatting. It was kind of the neatest thing. I'll have to dig up the screenshots from that. I'm sure I saved them. Ellerin, you were next. Go ahead.
A lot of what Ghosty said, that made a lot of sense, and as far as talking with special characters around the game, it would make it a little more interesting and make players more interactive with the game. And, you know, just to be fair to EA or whatever, I don't think, I'm not fully familiar with how the developers' meetings run with this as others are, but I think there's must be a lot more to it than just a big coffee clash. I think that I wouldn't want to be in their position to try to make a lot of these decisions on which way to go in the game, because, you know, like I said, it's such a complex game, and the player's mindset is so diversified now that there's no telling which way, you know, the wind's going to blow.
I know. I got a good idea of what goes into an EM event as far as the EM's part of it is concerned. Only because a friend of mine is an EM, and you know, she can't go into details about what exactly they're doing, but you know, the process is very interesting. It's a lot of fiction writing to get the storyline, because although they're not writing the overall story, they have to write their own unique story for their shard and how it works into the scenario that's going on at the moment. So it's a lot.
I think we lost Spider again.
Yeah, he's got thunderstorms running through his area and everything. I don't know, but let's see. Hopefully we'll figure out something. Probably pinged out. Let's see. And so I'll just basically pick up the ball where he left off and everything. But you know, the only thing is that I see is that there is a need for good versus evil and everything. Yeah, he just pinged out. And also, you know, another thing that you mentioned, Ghosty, and everything, is that, you know, when it comes to the EMs and everything, you say, you know, the EMs are not highly involved with the events and everything. And that's because, in part, they are limited as to how much time they can actually involve themselves with the game of Ultima Online in terms of, you know, running these events, planning these events, and all that. You know, it's not... They're actually limited on how many hours they can actually put into it, and that's where you probably see a problem in terms of, you know, EM participation and EM interaction and stuff like that. Go ahead, Ghosty.
Yeah, thanks. Just a note, it's been an hour, and I have to take leave. I'm very sorry. This was thoroughly enjoyable, and there's so much more that we could say on this topic, and I'm sure you guys will continue after I leave the room. But I wanted to just say thanks for letting me on. Thanks for letting me spew. And remind Spider Bite maybe to, whenever he gets back into the room, to just mention that me and him are going to be chatting next Saturday night, and I'm really looking forward to that.
All right, most definitely will, and you know, I was glad to have you here with us today, and you have a good one. All right, so let's go ahead and move on to the next topic here. I really didn't plan on this, so kind of doing the Dougaroo, figuring out what I'm going to say next. But other than that, I really don't see much else that we can talk about. So I'm kind of hoping Spider-Bite to get back here before I just completely drop the ball. Do you have anything that you wanted to add to that, Alarin? I guess not.
Not to this particular topic, no.
Yeah. All right. Well, I don't know. I don't think he's going to be back. And so with that said, let me have a look here in the IRC. We'll just play a little bit of music until I figure out what's going on. All right, so what we're going to do, you know, in the meantime, we're basically going to talk about factions a little bit, because we did talk about that a little bit before the show and everything, and was kind of like talking about, you know, how factions were in the old days and everything. My personal distaste with factions was, you know, getting res killed and everything. I don't know I can't remember what exactly your opinion was on factions and stuff like that, but it was something along those lines. Can you maybe share with me a little bit about what you think of factions?
I've never participated in factions much. Sorry.
You never participated in factions once?
Never once.
Wow.
I didn't care for them.
Okay, well, did you ever PvP back in the old days?
In the old days, I did. We hunted down people. Sure.
Excellent. Yeah, just I was just kind of taking a little walk down memory lane and everything, and just like, wow, just thinking about how you used to be a PKer and everything, and stuff like that. Did you have something you wanted to add to that?
I remember back in the old days where you could gain skill off of a GM player if you stood near him or stood on him, and you had that particular skill arrow up. That was kind of a good idea, but through the changes of the rewriting of the game, I imagine that was one reason they had to remove that part. Although that was, that also was player participation. Brought an interesting facet to the game.
Yeah. All right, well, I don't think he's going to be back. Let's see, he's had 5 minutes to get back. So what we're going to do, because I wasn't really planning on any of this, and so what we're going to do, we're just simply going to go ahead and conclude episode number 40 right here on this Sunday, and you'll definitely want to stick around because we got DJ Sandman coming up here pretty soon. He's going to be doing the Deal or No Deal here on UORadio, and so stick around, and I'll send him a little message letting him know that Spider-Bite ain't going to be around, and, and he can go ahead and do that. So thank you for joining us here and everything, and I guess I'll go ahead and give you an opportunity to plug anything that you wanted to plug from your auctions too, and if you have any parting words for us this afternoon.
Well, the auction's going to be having a lot of changes coming up, and we've got some exciting news coming out soon. Just log on to the site UOauction2.com and go to the forums or go to the news area, and you'll be able to keep up on what the coming changes will be. Happy bidding.
Excellent. And by the way, that's www.uo-auction2.com. And so keep that in mind whenever you're typing that in, because you'll probably go uo-auction2.com and it'll be like, well, there's not no website here. So just don't forget the dash. But anyways, that's going to go ahead and do it for us this afternoon here on UORadio's Talk Show, episode number 40. And so with that said, thank you for joining us, and Sandman's coming right up, so stick around.